Hello and welcome back to The Report. The reported beheading of American journalist James Foley by ISIS forces raises deep questions about whether it's in retreat, as the Iraqi government claims. But it also raises issues about the safety of journalists working in conflict zones in the Middle East and around the world. Nathaniel Samson has been following today's developments, so let's take a look at his report.
The killing of journalist James Foley, seen here after being released by the Libyan government in 2011, for reportedly entering the country illegally, have shaken Western governments and the media alike. Yesterday, a video surfaced claiming to show Foley's death at the hands of ISIS forces. Foley went missing in northern Syria 2 years ago, and the video is yet to be fully verified. Press freedom groups around the world have denounced the action, calling it a war crime and an affront to the vital work that they do.
It's a really big shock for Reporters Without Borders to get such news, and there's no word to say how we condemn this this terrible violation of freedom of information, killing a journalist because of his nationality and because of the policy of his government in another state is more than barbaric, is a war crime.
Statistically, over 160 journalists have died in Iraq over the last 20 years, with the majority of those deaths occurring during the American occupation between 2003 and 2011. But the new wave of violence sweeping the region is again starting to make the region increasingly lawless and unsafe for those wanting to report it. However, it is not just rebel groups that can potentially pose a threat to conflict reporting, but also established governments as well. Last month, Al Jazeera was forced to evacuate its Gaza offices after shots were fired. Al Jazeera claim an Israeli soldier fired 2 shots into their building. The Israeli government, however, deny the actions.
We feel that what happened was meant to be against Al Jazeera offices because the 2 bullets hit the office at the same time and from the side where we have the lives. There were no casualties but minor damages, but we will continue working and to send our professional message. We are professionals in covering the events in Gaza. We show the truth and reality as it is.
Conflict reporting is often seen as a dangerous but necessary public service to speak truth to power. But with an increasingly unstable world, conflict reporters face tough challenges in the years to come. Nathaniel Samson, Islam Channel.
Well, with me in the studio to discuss the dangers for journalists working in conflict zones is Niall Couper, who's head of media, Amnesty International UK, and Hassan Alkatib, who's a senior international correspondent at Etejah. And on Skype, we're joined by Jamal Osman, who's a journalist at Channel 4 News. Welcome to you all. Now, Hassan, you've worked in a number of very dangerous situations as a journalist. What should journalists do to take precautions when they head out to these places?
Well, of course, first of all, before they even begin going there, they have to make a commitment to try and expose whatever they see there, to tell the truth of what's going on there. Yeah. And of course, the first thing you do, and people like me, for instance, who have gone to certain areas such as Gaza, Libya, Egypt, the Crimea, for instance, I have to, think about my safety, think about what I'm going to be doing there, and what kind of reports am I, supposed to be, carrying out. So I think that one of the main things, of course, is to think about your own safety in terms of, what kind of dangers there'll be there. And a lot of people, some of my colleagues have taken certain steps in whereby they've gone into certain situations, such as Syria, for instance. I had a colleague of mine, Mayor Nasser, who was former, when I used to work at Press TV, he was shot dead by a sniper. He was embedded with the Syrian government, Syrian army at the time. Now, of course, he took a decision that, by being embedded, therefore there'll be more protection for him. And he was obviously, he took that decision. But of course, that we know in certain, conflict areas and zones that no matter how much precaution you may take, whether by being embedded or by being by yourself as an independent journalist, it is very dangerous if you're out there on the front line. And I myself haven't been actually out on the front line in certain conflict zones, because that is a risk, a journalist has to, make, because sometimes it can be very rewarding and sometimes it can be very fatal.
Mm. No, I mean, obviously the case that's put this in the news, the James Foley case, is somebody who was captured by and if this turns out to be true, executed by an armed group. But a lot of what you deal with is what state actors are doing to journalists, isn't it? I mean, if we look at Egypt, I think it's one of the countries where there's been a collapse of the safety of journalists in that country.
Certainly, and for us, we've been working for a long time on the Al Jazeera 3, the journalists that were silenced and are currently in prison. And we look at journalism as being one of the fundamental benefits for helping expose human rights abuses. So we spend a lot of time working with journalists, trying to support them, trying to raise their cases and trying to make sure they're as safe and secure as possible. Often for us, it is putting the spotlight on a journalist, and that helps their security. It helps them give that level of, so that the state authorities don't attack them, don't kind of persecute them, and that's the kind of security we try and give them. Equally, we realise that they are among the most bravest, the most important people that we have on this planet, to be honest, because they expose where human rights abuses exist, and their determination to expose the truth, to really get to the issues of things that we're seeing at the moment in Syria, in Gaza, in Iraq, and even in Ferguson right now in the United States. All of those issues, those journalists that are putting themselves on that front line to really discover the truth and tell us what's actually going on. Without those stories, we would be in a much poorer world. And I have such the greatest respect for it. At Amnesty, we celebrate those. We have our media awards every year. We're moving into something like the 22nd year of our media awards. And the whole event is all around celebrating the fantastic work that journalists do. And James Foley is just sadly the latest example of a journalist that has put themselves totally in the front line because of their passion to expose the truth, and we shouldn't forget that. We should celebrate the work of the journalists such as James Foley and the two other journalists that were hit by rubber bullets in Ferguson just on Tuesday night. Those sort of issues are things that we really need to be celebrating, about the bravery, because there's such a passion to tell people what's really happening, and that's what Amnesty is really proud and celebrates the work, such as my two colleagues here today work so passionately to do.
Let me ask Jamal from Channel 4 News. Jamal, welcome to the programme. Do you think, I mean, we're used to thinking, I guess, of the threat to journalists as being something that happens in conflict zones, of course, but Niall's just made the point, there's people who are facing considerable dangers in Ferguson, Missouri at the moment.
Yes, I think, there are many professions that are quite dangerous, and as you mentioned, I mean, the whole world seems to be on fire at the moment. But I think, as a journalist, there are some practical steps that you can take to stay safe, and you can only try your best. And I think by knowing the local area and the local actors and where to go and who to talk to, all that could help if you know the local area and the area that you're working on. But at the same time, I think as a journalist working in hostile places, at the back of your mind, every time you go there, you know that you could be killed. You know that this could be the last time you go on an assignment. So I'm sure many journalists are aware of the danger they are taking and are doing that because they want to tell those particular stories to the outside world. So it is happening, and Somalia, where I am from, is one of the most probably where many journalists get killed every year. So it's a sad reality, but if you're a journalist working in hostile places, I suppose you're prepared to take the risk.
Jamal, do you think that you're at a greater risk because you're from a big, well-known news organisation like Channel 4 News? Do you think that's protection, or do you think it makes you a target?
There is no protection. I'm sure if I get into trouble in Somalia, Channel 4, there is nothing they can do to save me. I mean, there are obviously procedures that we have to go through in order to make sure that I stay as safe as I can. But I think working for Channel 4, which is a Western organization, only puts you more danger, I would say. But in my case, I work in an environment that I am very familiar with. I know all the actors, all the different militias, and I try and talk to them and assess the situation before I go into particular areas. And if I feel it's not safe, then I don't take those risks. And I think going there in itself is a big danger. So some journalists would push it to the limit, and that's sometimes, I think, when some journalists get into a serious trouble, but the job in itself is dangerous. And I say working for Channel 4 doesn't make me safer.
Well, that's an interesting point, Hassan, because I mean, you know, if I can paraphrase what Jamal seems to be saying, it's not being embedded with the military of the country. It's not necessarily that you come from a big organisation, but that you know the society around you and understand where the danger signals are. It's a bit like, you know, when you first learn how to work a big city, you get to read the street. Do you think that's perhaps the most important thing? Yes,
of course, and I think you know, as Jamal was, you know, working in Somalia, as he's, you know, Somali origin, it does help to have that. And I think me as being an Arab, it was easier for me to go alone in certain countries like Egypt, Libya, and as I was in Syria and Iraq before that, it was easier for me because I'm an Arab. First of all, I can speak, you know, the mother tongue of the people who are there, and it is very important that you know, keep, you know, have the locals there who are not, you know, suspicious of you or, you know, alienated from you, that they can see what you're doing is, you know, as a service to them and to everyone else, you know, around the world. But there are times, and we've seen, you know, many times, even anyone, you know, because these are particular areas in, you know, conflict zones where there is no law. You know, you're not, you know, protected by any, you know, particular government that's going to, you know, help you to do whatever you're going to be doing. You know, these are particular areas where, you know, you'll be in danger of being killed, of being kidnapped. People are looking to make, you know, money by using you. You know, they further their own agenda. We saw a Channel 4 news reporter, Alex Thompson, when he was out in Syria, you know, when he was with the rebels, they tried to take him into a particular location where it was very dangerous for him, and he was about to be killed, and he said that. So journalists do have to, you know, always be aware that they could be used to further the agenda of whoever it is in that particular conflict zone. And I think that's where, you know, journalists need to be more careful about what they're doing and where they're going. And we've seen many examples, as in that report, of hundreds of people being killed, hundreds of journalists being killed, and many more jailed and kidnapped.
Niall, I mean, perhaps Amnesty's in a position to make a generalisation. I don't know. Do you feel that you know, that the world has become a less safe place for journalists over the space of some years, or do you think that it was always like this?
There's always been an element of journalists being under threat, because the reality is there have historically always been states and countries that don't want what they're doing to be exposed. What we now live in is a society that consumes more news, that consumes more media. And for that reason, there's a thirst for news. So we have a lot more journalists putting themselves on the front line to try and get themselves more information. The other issue is that some of the big news organisations are losing funding. So you're not seeing that kind of security checks, that some of the stuff that Jamal will have gone on Channel 4 or ITN taking place. And you have a lot more journalists that are freelancers and really, really brave that are going. I'm aware of several cases where people have put themselves across into Syria by smuggling in the back of a car, stuff like that that's happening, where they really are putting themselves completely at risk. And because of that, because of the thirst for news, that we're beginning to see this number of journalists that are being affected because of their risk and the lack of security and the lack of funding from the bigger news organisations who are running those risk assessments. At the same time, we do need to get those news stories out there. So from an Amnesty perspective, we're trying to engage and trying to work quite heavily with foreign correspondents to know what they're doing, to try and know how we can help them, how we can put them in contact with the right people, how we can try and make that job as safe and as easy as possible. Because for us, we need journalists. And I think that's the one thing a lot of people forget, that without that, then we really wouldn't know about the stories that are unfolding in Gaza, that are happening on Mount Etejah in Iraq, that are happening in Syria, that are happening in Ferguson, because those are the people that are telling us. Otherwise, we'd have all these state authorities being able to get away with shooting journalists in the back, shooting people in the back, beheading people, all these horrific stories that we're seeing, without the voices of brave individuals next to me and Jamal on the line from Skype, then we wouldn't know. So that's why, you know, we're really championing that work. And if there is an escalation, then at Amnesty we will try and do our best to make sure that the authorities really abide by and protect journalists as much as they possibly can and let them get on with their job.
Jamal, do you feel that there's kind of the cuts that have affected the journalist profession? I mean, I think anybody who works in the profession knows that you don't go out with the same size of team that you did at one stage. The rise of kind of, you know, citizen journalism. Do you think that's made the environment more risky than it might have been in the past?
I think in my case, it hasn't made any difference at all. But I'm sure there are many young journalists who are freelance, who are taking greater risk in order to might be break into the media or to get work or for other reasons. But in my case, I haven't felt any pressure in terms of finance and I generally prefer a smaller team. I tend to go there on my own with a local team. I tend to focus on Africa, and I think it's safer for me to work with local guys, and I am a local when I'm on the ground. And that's one of the measures I take when I am working there, me and some local guys, and I feel that's a safer way of working in those places. So financially, I haven't felt any pressure at all, but there are obviously some steps that you have to take to try and remain safe.
Well, that's been a fascinating discussion. I'd like to thank all my guests for looking in, but that's the end of tonight's programme, I'm afraid. I'd like to thank you at home for watching, of course, and remember, if you want to keep up with our Twitter conversation on tonight's stories, you can have a look at Islam channel and have a look at the hashtag The Report. Well, we're back tomorrow evening at the same time, but for now we'll leave you with footage of floods in China that brought caused by heavy rainfall and which resulted in devastation in the eastern Xinjiang province. But we'll be back tomorrow. Until then, good night.